David had always admired people who could speak English fluently. He watched them with amazement as they spoke confidently, using the right words at the right time. Their sentences flowed smoothly, and they never seemed to struggle to find the right words. Whether it was his teacher explaining a lesson, his classmates chatting during lunch, or someone speaking on television, fluent speakers fascinated him. David often dreamed of being like them. He imagined himself standing in front of a group, speaking without fear, and making people listen with interest. But in reality, things were very different for him. Whenever he tried to speak English, his heart would race, and his mind would go blank. He would open his mouth to say something, but no words would come out. Even if he knew what he wanted to say, he would hesitate, afraid that he might make a mistake. One day, during an English lesson, David's teacher asked him to read a paragraph from the textbook. David's hands felt cold, and his fingers trembled as he held the book. His classmates were looking at him, waiting for him to start reading. He took a deep breath and tried to focus. But as he began, his voice was shaky, and he stumbled over a few words. Some of his classmates giggled, while others whispered to each other. David felt embarrassed. He quickly finished reading and sat down, his face turning red. He wished he could disappear at that moment. At lunchtime, David sat alone on a bench, thinking about what had happened. Why am I like this? He wondered. Why can't I just speak like everyone else? He knew that his classmates were not trying to be mean, but their laughter still hurt. He wanted to be better. He wanted to speak fluently without fear. That evening, David spoke to his older sister, Emma. She was a university student and very good at English. Emma, how do you speak English so well? He asked. Emma smiled and said, I wasn't always good at it. When I was younger, I used to be just like you. I was nervous and scared of making mistakes. But I practiced a lot, and slowly I became better. Practice? But how can I practice when I get scared every time I try? David asked. The key is to start small, Emma explained. You don't have to speak perfectly from the beginning. Just try a little every day. Start by talking to yourself in English, reading books aloud, or watching English videos. The more you practice, the more confident you will become. David thought about what Emma said. Maybe he needed to stop being afraid and start practicing. But the thought of speaking in front of others still scared him. Could he really change? The next day at school, David decided to take a small step. During recess, he saw his friend Sam playing with a soccer ball. Hey, Sam, can I play too? David asked. He usually spoke in his native language with his friends, but this time he tried speaking in English. Sam smiled. Of course, he said, passing the ball to David. David felt a small sense of achievement. It was just a short sentence, but he had spoken in English without hesitation. He realized that maybe, just maybe, he could improve if he kept trying. That evening, David stood in front of the mirror and practiced speaking. He introduced himself in English, talked about his favorite hobbies, and described his day. He felt silly at first, but as he continued, he became more comfortable. A few days later, during an English class, the teacher asked a question. David knew the answer, but hesitated. He looked around and saw his classmates raising their hands confidently. His heart pounded. Should I try? He thought. He remembered what Emma said. Start small. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Taking a deep breath, David slowly raised his hand. The teacher noticed and called on him. David, do you have the answer? David's palms were sweaty, but he forced himself to speak. Yes, ma'am. The answer is. He said as clearly as he could. His voice was a little shaky, but he did it. The teacher smiled. Good job, David, she said. David felt a wave of relief and pride. He wasn't perfect, but he had spoken in front of the class. That night, he told Emma about it. She patted his back and said, See, you're already improving. Keep going. David knew he had a long way to go, but he had taken his first step. He was ready to continue his journey to fluency. He decided to challenge himself by practicing speaking in different ways. Every morning, he read aloud from his English book. He tried speaking to his classmates in English, even if he made mistakes. At night, he wrote short stories in English and read them to Emma. Slowly, he began to feel more comfortable with the language. One afternoon, his teacher announced a class presentation. Each student had to speak for 2 minutes about their favorite hobby. David's heart pounded again, but this time he didn't feel as scared. He had been practicing every day. When the day of the presentation arrived, David walked to the front of the class. He took a deep breath and began to speak. My favorite hobby is playing soccer. Soccer is a fun sport that keeps me active and strong. I play with my friends every weekend. It teaches teamwork and discipline. As he spoke, he noticed something different. His words were coming out more smoothly. He wasn't hesitating as much. He even smiled at his classmates while speaking. When he finished, his classmates clapped. David felt a sense of joy and accomplishment. He had done it. He had spoken confidently in front of the class. That evening, he ran home excitedly and told Emma about his success. I did it, Emma. I spoke in front of the whole class. Emma smiled. I knew you could do it. See what practice can do. David nodded. He realized that confidence didn't come overnight. It came with small steps, daily practice, and believing in himself. He promised to continue learning and improving every day. From that day on, David was no longer afraid to speak. He still made mistakes sometimes, but he didn't let them stop him. He had started his journey to fluency, and he was determined to reach his goal. Little did he know, his biggest challenge was yet to come, a challenge that would test everything he had learned so far. David sat in his classroom, tapping his pencil against his desk. It was a bright Monday morning, and the air smelled of fresh chalk and books. The classroom buzzed with excitement as students chatted about their weekend adventures. Some had visited their grandparents, others had played video games, and a few had gone on picnics with their families. David, however, had spent most of his weekend struggling with English. He had tried to practice speaking, but every time he thought of saying something, he hesitated. His words felt trapped inside his mind, refusing to come out smoothly. He envied his classmates who spoke English effortlessly, without stopping to think about every word. Just then, Ms. Lily, their English teacher, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. The classroom fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "Good morning, class," she said with a warm smile. "Good morning, Ms. Lily." The students responded in unison. Ms. Lily picked up a piece of chalk and wrote something on the blackboard. Impromptu speech contest. David frowned. He wasn't sure what that meant. He wasn't alone. Several students whispered to each other, trying to guess what Ms. Lily was about to announce. Ms. Lily turned back to face the class. Today, we're going to have a special challenge. It's called an impromptu speech contest. Impromptu means that you will speak without preparing beforehand. A murmur spread across the room. Some students looked excited, but David felt his stomach tighten. Ms. Lily continued. Here's how it works. Each of you will come to the front of the class, and I will give you a random topic. You will have only 10 seconds to think, and then you must start speaking for 1 full minute. David's heart started pounding. 1 full minute? Speaking without preparation? That sounded terrifying. His best friend, Sam, nudged him. This is going to be fun, he whispered. David forced a smile, but deep inside, he didn't feel the same way. Facing the fear, Ms. Lily pulled out a small box from her desk. Inside this box, I have different topics written on slips of paper. Each student will pick one and speak about it. She walked to the front of the classroom and said, "Let's start with Emma." Emma, a confident girl who loved acting, stood up eagerly and picked a slip. She read it aloud. My favorite animal. With a bright smile, she began speaking right away. My favorite animal is the dolphin because they are very intelligent and friendly. They can jump high in the air and even understand some human words. I once saw a dolphin show, and it was amazing. The class clapped when she finished. David swallowed nervously. One by one, students went up to speak. Some were confident, while others stumbled and hesitated. Some forgot their words, and a few even burst into nervous laughter. Then, Ms. Lilly looked around and said, "David, it's your turn." David froze. His hands felt sweaty. His legs felt like they were glued to the floor. He wanted to disappear. Sam patted him on the back. "You can do it, David," he said encouragingly. David slowly stood up and walked to the front. Ms. Lilly held out the box. "Go ahead, pick a topic," she said kindly. With trembling fingers, David reached inside and pulled out a slip of paper. He unfolded it and read the words silently. The importance of trees. His mind went blank. What should I say? He had only 10 seconds to think. David tried to remember facts about trees. He knew they gave us oxygen. They provided shade. Animals lived in them. But how could he put that into words quickly? "Your time starts now," Ms. Lilly announced. David took a deep breath and began, trees are very important because, his voice shook. He could hear his classmates shifting in their seats, waiting for him to continue. He took another deep breath and tried again. "Trees give us oxygen. Without trees, we wouldn't be able to breathe. They also provide shade, which helps us stay cool on hot days. Animals, like birds and squirrels, live in trees. And they help make the world beautiful." The words didn't come out as smoothly as he wanted, but he kept going. "They also help stop soil from washing away when it rains. And we can get fruits from trees like apples, mangoes, and oranges. So we must plant more trees and take care of them." Before he knew it, Ms. Lilly smiled and said, "Time's up." David let out a deep sigh of relief. His classmates clapped, and Sam gave him a thumbs up. David walked back to his seat, his heart still racing. He knew he hadn't spoken perfectly. He had hesitated and stumbled, but he had done it. Ms. Lilly beamed. "David, that was wonderful. You shared great information, and most importantly, you did not give up. That's what matters the most." David felt a small spark of confidence grow inside him. Maybe he wasn't the best English speaker yet, but he had taken his first step, and that was just the beginning. That evening, David sat in his room, staring at his English notebook. His mind was still racing from the announcement of the speech contest. He knew that if he wanted to do well, he needed to train his brain to think faster in English. But how? Every time he tried to speak, he hesitated, searching for words. Sometimes, by the time he figured out what to say, the conversation had already moved on. David knew he had to change this, and he was determined to find a way. He opened his laptop and began searching for tips on how to think and speak in English more fluently. He came across different methods that successful English speakers used, and he decided to try them one by one. One of the first techniques David discovered was called shadowing. At first, he wasn't sure what it meant. Was it about following someone like a shadow? Curious, he clicked on a video that explained the method. Shadowing, as he learned, was a technique where he had to listen to someone speaking in English and repeat exactly what they said at the same time. It was like being an echo. The idea was that this would help his brain get used to English words and sentences quickly. Excited to try, David found a short English story online and played the audio. The narrator spoke slowly and clearly, so he tried to repeat after him. At first, it was hard. His tongue felt heavy, and he stumbled over the words. But instead of giving up, he kept practicing. He listened to the story again and again, shadowing the speaker each time. After a few days, something amazing happened. David noticed that his mouth started moving faster. The words were coming out more naturally. He was beginning to think in English instead of translating from his native language. This was a huge step forward. Practicing common phrases. The next technique David found was learning common phrases. He realized that English speakers often use the same phrases in different situations. Instead of trying to build sentences from scratch every time, he could remember these phrases and use them instantly. For example, instead of struggling to find words when greeting someone, he learned phrases like, "Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you. What have you been up to?" When talking about opinions, he learned phrases like, "I think that, in my opinion, that's a great idea." And for expressing agreement or disagreement, "I totally agree. That's true, but I see your point, but I think." He wrote these phrases on flashcards and practiced them every day. His goal was to make them automatic, so when he needed them, they would come out without thinking. Soon, David noticed that he wasn't pausing as much when speaking. Instead of searching for words, he was pulling out these phrases effortlessly, making his speech sound smoother and more natural. The most exciting technique David discovered was called Think Fast, Speak Fluent. It was a special exercise that trained his brain to respond quickly in English. The idea was simple. He had to answer questions as fast as possible without worrying about mistakes. If he didn't know the exact words, he had to keep talking and explain in a different way. The goal was to keep his brain active and thinking in English. David decided to practice this every morning. He stood in front of the mirror and asked himself random questions like, "What did you do yesterday? What's your favorite book and why? If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go?" At first, he struggled. His brain wanted to stop and think about perfect answers. But he reminded himself that fluency was not about being perfect. It was about being confident. As he continued practicing, he noticed something incredible. His answers started coming faster. His brain was learning to think directly in English without translating. This was exactly what he needed for the speech contest. Even though David was improving, he still had one big fear: making mistakes. He was afraid that if he spoke too fast, he would say something wrong and people would laugh at him. This fear made him hesitate. One day, while watching an interview with a famous English speaker, he heard something that changed his mindset. The speaker said, "Mistakes are proof that you are learning." David realized that every fluent speaker once made mistakes too. Instead of fearing them, he decided to embrace them. From that day on, he made a rule for himself. Whenever he made a mistake, he would laugh and correct himself instead of feeling embarrassed. This new mindset helped him feel more confident. He started speaking more freely, without the fear of being wrong. And something magical happened. His mistakes became less and less because he was learning from them. David knew that one day of practice wasn't enough. If he wanted to think fast and speak fluent English, he had to practice every day. So, he created a daily routine. 1. Morning, 10 minutes of answering random questions out loud. 2. Afternoon, 15 minutes of shadowing an English speaker. 3. Evening, 20 minutes of watching English videos and practicing common phrases. By making a habit, speaking English became a natural part of his life. He no longer felt nervous. Instead, he felt excited to practice and improve. The result of his hard work. After weeks of practicing, the day of the speech contest arrived. David took a deep breath as he walked onto the stage. His teacher smiled at him and gave him the topic, the importance of dreams. For a moment, the old fear tried to creep back in, but then he remembered everything he had learned. He had trained for this. He had practiced shadowing, learned common phrases, and mastered the think fast, speak fluent method. He opened his mouth and started speaking. The words flowed smoothly. His ideas came naturally. He wasn't stuck searching for words. He was thinking in English and expressing himself clearly. When he finished, the audience clapped loudly. David smiled. He didn't just succeed in the contest. He had succeeded in something even bigger. He had trained his brain to think fast and speak fluent English. The day of the contest had finally arrived. David woke up early, his stomach filled with butterflies. As he got ready for school, he looked at himself in the mirror. "You can do this," he whispered to himself. All week, he had been practicing how to speak quickly without fear. He had practiced in front of the mirror, recorded his voice, and even spoken to his little brother, who barely understood what a speech contest was. But now, standing outside his classroom, he felt nervous again. His hands were cold, and his legs felt shaky. He peeked inside the room. His classmates were already seated, chatting excitedly. The teacher, Ms. Olivia, was setting up the microphone on the small stage at the front of the room. The big moment was just minutes away. "David," a voice called. It was his best friend, Jake. "Are you ready?" David forced a smile. "I think so," he said, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. Jake grinned. "Remember what we practiced? No overthinking, just speak. You got this." David nodded. He had spent the past week training himself to think fast and speak fluently. He repeated phrases quickly, answered random questions without hesitation, and even practiced giving short speeches in front of his family. But now, standing here, all his confidence seemed to vanish. One by one, the students were called to the stage. Some spoke smoothly, while others hesitated and struggled with their words. The teacher smiled at each speaker, encouraging them to continue. Then it happened. "Next, we have David," Ms. Olivia announced. The room fell silent. David felt his heart pounding. He took a deep breath and slowly walked to the front of the class. He could feel dozens of eyes watching him. He felt like turning back, but he reminded himself why he was here. Think fast, speak fluent. No fear. Ms. Olivia smiled and handed him a small folded paper. "Your topic is the importance of dreams." David's mind went blank for a second. Dreams? He hadn't expected this topic. The room felt even quieter. He saw Jake giving him a thumbs up from his seat. David took another deep breath. He reminded himself of all the things he had practiced. He knew about dreams, not just the ones people have when they sleep, but also the dreams people have for their future. He looked at his classmates and began speaking. "Dreams are like stars in the sky," he started. "Sometimes they seem far away, but if you keep moving toward them, you'll reach them one day." A few students leaned forward, listening. This gave David confidence. Every great person started with a dream. A scientist dreams of discovering something new. A teacher dreams of helping students learn. A musician dreams of creating beautiful songs. Without dreams, we wouldn't have great inventions, art, or knowledge. He paused, then added, "Even kids have dreams. Some dream of being astronauts. Others dream of becoming doctors, and some, like me, dream of speaking English fluently without fear." There were few chuckles in the audience. Even Ms. Olivia smiled. David continued, "Dreams are important because they give us a reason to work hard. They make us excited about the future. If we believe in our dreams and work for them, we can achieve anything." As he finished, the class erupted in applause. David couldn't believe it. Had he really just spoken without hesitation? Had he really made his classmates listen and react? Ms. Olivia clapped her hands. "Well done, David. That was a powerful speech." David smiled, his nervousness replaced with pride. He had done it. He had spoken fluently without fear. After the last student gave their speech, Ms. Olivia stood up and announced the winners. In third place, we have Lily. A girl with glasses walked up to receive her ribbon. In second place, we have Jason. The tall boy next to David grinned and walked up to accept his award. And in first place, our contest winner is Sophia. The class clapped as Sophia walked to the front to collect her certificate. David clapped too, even though a small part of him had hoped to win. But then, something surprising happened. Ms. Olivia turned to David and said, "And a special mention goes to David for showing incredible confidence an improvement in his speaking skills. David's eyes widened. The class cheered for him. He may not have won first place, but he had won something even more important: self-belief. As he sat back down, Jake patted his back. "Dude, that was amazing. You sounded like a pro." David laughed. "I didn't think I could do it, but once I started speaking, it just happened." Jake nodded. "That's because you trained your mind. You thought fast and spoke fluently, and you didn't let fear stop you." David realized Jake was right. He had always believed that fluency meant speaking perfectly, but now he understood the truth. It wasn't about perfection. It was about confidence. It was about trusting himself. From that day on, David never hesitated to speak English again. Whether in class, at home, or even with strangers, he spoke without fear. He knew that every time he spoke, he was getting better. And the best part? His dream of speaking fluently was no longer just a dream. It was becoming his reality. David's journey proved that fluency isn't about being perfect. It's about thinking fast and speaking with confidence. If you want to improve your English like David, subscribe to English Tone for more inspiring stories and practical tips. Don't forget to like, share, and comment if this story helped you.